Explain what tar sands means for you in Canada and how it has affected your whole country.
The tar sands are the single largest industrial project on Earth. The scale is almost incomprehensible if you've never been there. They are not only the single reason that Canada's climate pollution is going up, that we will not meet any of the targets, even the weak targets that have been set, but there are projects that are 70 kilometers across Canada. And, you know, one of the important things about what's happening in Canada right now is that Canadian policy on climate change, on environment, on many issues is being held hostage to the goal that this federal government, the Harper government, and the oil industry have of expanding the tar sands no matter what the cost. You know, oil corrodes. It's corroding our pipelines and leading to spills and leaks that are threatening our communities, but it's also corroding our democracy. What we're seeing in Canada is literally the elimination of 40 years of environmental laws in the last 2 years in order to make way for quick expansion of tar sands and pipelines. I mean, the Keystone is not the only pipeline this industry is proposing. It's a spider web of pipelines across North America so that they can try and expand this dirty oil as quickly as possible.
And why is it so dirty?
It's really dirty because the oil is mixed with sand. So in order to get that oil out, they have to use natural gas. More natural gas is used in the tar sands than all the homes in Canada. So they use natural gas and fresh water to actually remove the oil from the sand. And the result is that each barrel of oil from the tar sands has 3 to 4 times more emissions, more climate pollution than conventional oil.
And explain how this pipeline would traverse Canada and the United States and where it goes, what it's for. Does the U.S. benefit from the oil going through the pipeline?
No, this is an export pipeline. What the industry wants is they want to get this oil off the continent because they'll get a better price. And so all of the pipelines that are currently being proposed are in order so that the industry can export the oil. So the Keystone, for example, will go all the way from Alberta straight down through the United States and out to the Gulf. And it's not for U.S. consumption. The majority of that oil is destined to, you know, the U.S. is really just in the Canadian oil industry's way. And the result is that this is a pipeline that presents enormous risk to the American people as a result of the terrible record of oil spills and leaks, and not a lot of benefit.
Sephora, you've been meeting with a number of scientists this weekend. The New York Times had an interesting editorial called Silencing Scientists, and it said over the last few years, the government of Canada, led by Stephen Harper, has made it harder and harder for publicly financed scientists to communicate with the public and with other scientists. What's going on?
Well, first of all, the government has shut down the majority of scientific research in the country that had to deal with climate change. This is a government in denial, and they do not want to talk about climate change. So last year, they shut down the Atmospheric Research Station, which was one of the most important places in the world to get climate data. They shut down the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy. They've fired hundreds of scientists, and the ones that are left are being told that they can't release their research to us, even though it's taxpayers-funded research. They're also being told that they can't speak to the press unless they have a handler, and it's an approved interview. They have to have a handler from the Prime Minister's office. So the scientists that I've talked to they're embarrassed, they're frustrated, they're protesting. Last week in Canada, we had hundreds of scientists hit the streets in their lab coats, protesting the federal government because they can't speak. They're being muzzled. You know, to the extent that the, quite eminent journal Nature last year published an editorial saying it's time for Canada to set its scientists free.
I mean, this is an amazing story. We know it in the United States under the Bush administration. You had James Hansen, who is head of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA, who had a handler who hadn't graduated from college. He was, I think his credential was that he had been active on the Bush campaign committee, re-election campaign committee. And James Hansen had to go through him to deal with the media.
Right. Well, and James Hansen still got to deal with, to speak to the media. Most of the scientists that I'm talking to in Canada can't speak to the media at all. And if they want to talk about climate change, they're definitely not going to get those interviews approved. But it's not just the scientists that are being muzzled and the climate research that's being shut down and people that are being fired. We've also seen an unprecedented attack on charitable organizations that deal with environmental research. The Canadian government has the majority of environmental organizations under Canadian revenue audit. And so the result is you have the majority of the country's environmental leaders not able to be a watchdog on what the government is doing. And secret documents revealed through Freedom of Information this year show that the government eliminated all these environmental laws in Canada at the request of the oil industry because the environmental laws were in their way. The Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline crosses 1,000 streams. And that would normally trigger an environmental assessment process. Well, when you have no laws, you have no environmental assessment. So when they eradicated all the environmental laws, 3,000 environmental assessments for major industrial projects in Canada were cancelled. Now those projects are just approved without environmental assessment.
What does it mean, the activism, for you in Canada, in the United States, when clearly President Obama has been forced to delay the decision on the Keystone XL because of the massive protest against it?
I think that what we're seeing, not only in the United States, but also in Canada, is an unprecedented climate movement. I think that these pipelines have provided a tangible focus for communities on the ground. And the oil industry and the government have, in a sense, created their own perfect storm. Because while before it might have been people who were concerned about climate change that would get involved in tar sands or pipeline issues, now it's people worried about their groundwater. It's First Nations and Indigenous people across North America who are protesting their rights. It's landowners. And so now you have this perfect storm.
Earlier this month, the legendary Canadian musician Neil Young spoke out against the extraction of tar sands oil in Canada and its export to the U.S. through the proposed Keystone XL pipeline. He was speaking to a National Farmers Union rally in Washington, D.C. Neil Young described his recent visit to a tar sands community in Alberta, Canada.
The fact is, Fort McMurray looks like Hiroshima. Fort McMurray is a wasteland. The Indians up there and the native peoples are dying. The fuels all over, the fumes everywhere. You can smell it when you get to town. The closest place to Fort McMurray that is doing the tar sands work is 25 or 30 miles out of town, and you can taste it when you get to Fort McMurray. People are sick. People are dying of cancer because of this.
That's the legendary musician Neil Young. I don't know how many people here in the U.S. know that he is Canadian, but he is. The significance of him coming in. Also, what did the climatologist, the scientist James Hansen, call the tar sands?
Dr. Hansen has referred to the Keystone XL pipeline as the fuse to the largest carbon bomb on the planet. And he says that his studies are showing that if we allow the tar sands to expand at the rates that the government and industry want it to expand, then it's game over for the planet.
Zipporah Berman, I saw you at the International Women's Earth and Climate Summit in Suffern, and you talked about your son having to respond to a question of his. We only have a minute, but explain.
One night at dinner, my son, who was 8 at the time, turned to me and said, "Mommy, why does the government think you're a terrorist?" Which is not really the conversation you want to have with your son. Because he had heard on the radio that on the Senate floor, the Harper government was proposing that we change the definition of the term domestic terrorism in Canada to include environmentalism.
And so what does that mean for you, and what does that mean for environmental activists? Where are you headed now? What are you going to do around tar sands?
Canadians who care about these issues are under attack by our own government, and we're being told that that what we do is not in the national interest unless we support the oil industry's agenda. But I think this government has overreached, and we are now finding, our phones are ringing off the hook. People are joining the campaign and stepping up. And let's be clear, Canadians want clean energy. Canadians, many of them, are very embarrassed about what our government is doing internationally. So our movement is growing, and so far, we have slowed down all of these pipelines and the expansion.
What's the alternative?
Well, the alternative for Canada is not only clean energy, renewable energy, which now we can be a sector in the country, then it starts to destroy your manufacturing base, your service industry, your tourism industry. We need to diversify the economy, and that's entirely possible.